Okay, well, this is one of the more interesting episodes because of the fact that they actually leave it very ambiguous as to which side in this conflict are actually the bad guys. And that makes the story a bit more compelling than it would be otherwise. And also, it gives you reason to, well, if you're doing this as a TTRPG, you're actually giving your players a choice, not necessarily being like, oh, this is the obvious right answer. What if there is no obvious right answer? Yeah. And that's where we go with this one. The things with this one that make it so ethically questionable and uncertain. Well, the high ground. See, Rutium has been trading with the Federation. It's a minor galactic power, blah, blah, blah. The Rutians are interesting because while they're a near-human race, unlike a lot of them that do the rubber forehead thing, Rutians have colored streaks in their hair to make them obviously different from humans. No effort is made to explain how, why they're like this. They just are. At any rate, one of the things about this that's interesting is that what is the plot hook for the crew of the Enterprise to go there? Well, they're actually just delivering medical supplies because the Rutians requested it, apparently. Yeah. And because they know there's political unrest, they don't, have people just wandering around the planet having fun. No, no, no. However, Crusher gets kidnapped anyways. Only Crusher gets kidnapped. But Crusher gets kidnapped. And then we go into a weird science thing in Star Trek where Star Trek takes a very Star Trek approach to science, where some technology is mentioned as being horribly flawed and unusable, and oh wait, people are using it anyways, because it has advantages that matter from a real world perspective. And while, yes, there is a downside to using it, those who have the technology are willing to live with that. Or, well, actually, more like they're willing to allow it to kill them because they feel that is the lesser of two evils. Yeah, Rutia has been having civil unrest because, well, what's the best way to put this? Part of their civilization attempted to subjugate the rest of it. Yeah, that's part of what makes this one ethically questionable. It's like, Alexana Devos, does she represent bloodthirsty conquerors who aren't really the rightful rulers, but rather people who forced their rule on the rest of the planet? that is where the questions get interesting. Like, why are the Ansata terrorists willing to die for their cause? That's an interesting question. At any rate, as for the Star Trek being unstar trekking its Star Trekness, they have the Elway theorem. Note, the Elway theorem, as discussed by the crew of the Enterprise, to include Wesley Crusher, is not actually the scientific principle that the Ansata used to create their folded space device. No. But the fundamental principles that they used are similar to what Elway came up with. But the Federation, after experimenting with the technology, decided that it was too dangerous and that they had no reason to use it, and thus wrote it off as an interesting scientific anomaly that they didn't really have any reason to use. But that's where things get interesting, because as a method of teleportation, it actually works quite well for the purposes of the Ansata terrorists. So they are willing to use it, even though they know that it'll eventually kill them. Now, the explanation of why it rewrites your DNA. Yeah, this is Star Trek. They're not going to explain that one. But the whole like cumulative damage to your biochemistry, and eventually you die, yada yada yada. Pretty simple downside. And that's actually the thing about this that's interesting, is that the extra Star Trekky way of looking at this is, well, that technology is bad. Guess we're not going to use that. The real world way of looking at the technology is, well, this technology is dangerous, but if we use it carefully and don't overuse it, it will be useful to us. That's what people in real life would do with it. And oh wait, that's exactly what the Ansata use it for. And one of the things that's interesting with it is that it is actually something that is a very difficult method of teleportation to block. And the crew of the Enterprise, they don't actually ever figure out how to block it properly. I don't think they do it anyways. Well, see, because it had a different method than regular transporters. Regular transporters being safer, obviously, but, you know, different advantages, different disadvantages. Regular transporters can't transport through the form of shielding the Federation uses. This can. And that is a very potent ability. So, you know, writing that, because like using it once, no big deal. Using it a dozen times, that's a problem. And that is the basic premise of this, is that these guys have been using it a lot. So it's started to kill them all by the point in which the crew of the Enterprise meets them. Which, if you're playing a TTRPG, giving the bad guys tech that the good guys don't want to use is an option for making the bad guys a threat that the good guys can't directly counteract. which, it's a thing where you have to give the players difficulty and need to force them to find solutions to problems. And this would definitely be a problem. Anyway, they eventually figure out how to track it because while it is difficult to block, it does, if you know what you're looking for, leave a traceable pattern, which is apparently some sort of subspace wake. And you look here, you see these like strings going. I'm not really sure if those are wakes going to and from this one specific site or something else, but whatever. This is the location where they had their base, and thus the location where all of the transits were going to or from. Also, this is, I think, the only proper map we have of Rutia, and it's not a complete one. So it's like we have a picture of what the planet looks like from orbit, but again, very incomplete, and this actually has more detail to it. One of the things with Rutia is that they claim that one of the continents uh, effectively subjugated the other. Because there's the whole like West Continent, which is where the Ansata came from, and the East Continent, which is apparently forcing the West Continent to serve them. That is the sort of arrangement that, the Federation would consider unworkable for a member. But these guys aren't Federation members. They're allied with the Federation in some way, but they're not members. Generally on peaceful terms with the Federation, though. Which is, of course, the reason why the crew of the Enterprise D were here delivering medical supplies. But that's the whole like moral quandary here. It's like, yes, you can do whatever discussion of ethics of using those uh, subspace beaming things that slowly kill you. Like, whatever. That's a thing, I guess. But the real ethical dilemma in this episode, and something that you could actually pose to your players, is are you going to support the oppressive government, or are you going to support the violent terrorists who can and have killed people because reasons, and people that aren't actually directly, well, let's just say that they are innocent victims or bystanders and not actually someone who are combatants. And that is the crux of this one. And the way the actual episode ends is the Ansata leader gets killed. And the technology that he and his compatriots were using gets destroyed. And the woman who kills him thinks it's going to result in their society being at peace, at least for a while. But you're like, okay, sure, you think this is going to reduce the amount of violence. Well, you killed the people who were protesting, so now there's no one left protesting and doing sabotage and whatever else terroristic acts they were doing. Because that was the reason for supporting the government, is that the Ansata terrorists are, genuine terrorists, and they're doing random violence because of the fact that that's just what they do. And so both sides in this dispute have a reason to not want to side with them. And thus, you as the players in the TTRPG would need to seriously question what you want to do. And that makes for a fun TTRPG session. It's like you need to question the actions of the alien of the week. You need to stop and think about it carefully. Because you have two sides, neither of which is obviously the good guys or obviously the bad guys. Both of them are differently bad. And that's what made this an interesting episode. Is that, yes, she ends up being the person who wins. But realistically, whether she won, lost, or died wouldn't really make a huge amount of difference in Rutian society. Because other than the fact that she killed the terrorist guy, the big picture didn't change. Ew, that's another interesting thing. They do actually state at one point that the Ansata terrorist cult has approximately 200 members. And that's like active members, not just active members plus all of the hangers-on, who are people who support them in some way but don't actually participate directly in their actions. No. Those who support them, that number's in the thousands. It's just that most of them just, do their daily lives and every now and then throw in something to help them a little bit. Yeah. Also, there's the whole ethical question of how did one continent on this planet subjugate the other? Because, again, that's a big, big aspect of Rutian history, is that the actual government of the planet is on the eastern continent, but the western continent doesn't fully agree with that. And thus creates a question of, why are they fighting like this? If the so-called planetary government is not actually endorsed by the entire population of the planet, how did they come to be in charge? And that is a question that the episode doesn't actually answer. It kind of hints that it may have been, forced, but it doesn't really say. So that's something you could have a lot of fun with. Anyway, though, the majority of the episode is really just like trying to figure out how to interact with the various Rutians. Because like you have the government ones, then you have the Ansata terrorist ones, which both of them are things that are in some way or another meaningful and useful. Now, as a GM, you could make up your own terrorist group and your own planet to have the terrorist group on. In some ways, it might actually be better because of the fact that... Wait, what? Irish Union of 2024? Oh my. Anyway, though, that's actually something about this that makes it very, very compelling, is that you have people fighting for very real reasons. Things that I could visualize people actually fighting to the death for in real life. And thus putting players into a situation where they see and hear and know what's going on and have to choose. Well, that's the story, all right. At any rate, though, the basic gist of the story is pretty simple and easy. The moral questions, that is what makes the story shine, and that I think is as far as I can go on this one because, as I put it earlier, as I say in a lot of these actually, is that playing it straight isn't necessarily the best option. For this one, from a big picture perspective, you'd probably be better off having a different group of Rutian terrorists, or well, okay, when I say different group, I don't mean like a different terrorist organization, but a different cell of that organization doing things because it makes sense for even if the Rutian terrorists only have one working example of that teleportation device, it makes sense that they would have schematics for how to build another one if they were able to find the parts. And maybe one of the other Rutian terrorist cells has been working on that. And now you and your players need to fix it. Or maybe, decide that you don't want to fix it, perhaps. At any rate, though, that's my thoughts on this one. Let me know what yours are. See you next time.